Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today I just want to give a little bit of a roundup of the latest polling, quickly duck into the betting markets, and then just talk a little bit about my updated sort of nowcast projected map, which shows Labor forming a minority government at this stage. So beginning with the polling, just a quick broad look at where the major national polls are at with their latest releases. So News Poll out in front showing a 2-point lead to Labor in their last poll. Redbridge, they had a 51-49 and then they released a 52-48 to Labor that we're not exactly sure if it was their marginal tracker or an actual national poll, so I've just gone in between. YouGov has been bouncing around sort of even to 1-point Labor lead for the last few weeks. Roy Morgan been very kind to Labor in recent weeks. Essential has moved to a 1-point lead for Labor, and then the last Freshwater poll was still showing a Liberal lead or a coalition lead, but that was a bit of an older poll at this point, and then Resolve 50-50, but they've been generally pretty kind to the coalition. In some of the state breakdowns that I've been able to get have a look at, it does seem as if, despite the falling national vote, the coalition are holding up relatively well on the eastern seaboard, and Resolve in particular was showing that Labor's primary vote still hasn't really recovered from that kind of late 20s sort of area that they were shown to slip into sort of last year, but the flow of preferences is keeping them ahead. So interestingly, Queensland, like there's been a few polls that have shown that the coalition are holding up very well in Queensland and are actually set to improve their two-party preferred position there. And that's despite Labor throwing a lot of resources at seats like Leichhardt and Brisbane and even Dixon. So News Poll, Freshwater, Resolve, and there was a Redbridge state poll all showed that the coalition were performing strongly. New South Wales is another one where I think Demos AU had a 51-49 to the coalition. There's been a couple of 50-50s. I think Newspoll had 50-50 in their latest breakdown. Now, there might have been some movement since, but it does show that New South Wales probably being the key battleground of this election. The coalition vote's still more or less holding up. There does appear to have been some movement back to Labor in Victoria. There was 3 polls in a row that showed the coalition trailing by only 1%, but the latest Resolve poll showed them trailing by 2%, which is still a swing to the coalition of about 2.5%. So we'll keep an eye on it, but Labor recovering in Victoria would be sort of a way to definitely lock the coalition out of majority government and make it quite difficult for them to form government at all. And then we've got the mixed results in South Australia and WA, but it's mostly been good news for Labor on that front. In terms of the trends, Labor definitely reclaiming the economic narrative. We saw that in the crosstabs of Redbridge poll that for the first time in a while, Labor's economic vision is actually seen to be superior to the coalition's. The coalition's losing ground with women, and yesterday the decision to backflip on the public servants and the working from home and edict, that's probably a symptom of that. Resolve also found that since their crazy 55-45 coalition lead, that they found now that the male vote has shifted back towards Labor. And that was something we saw late in the campaign in Queensland as well, especially young men. So that could have implications for the Greens as well. And then again, looking at the trends in Redbridge, the solid vote is still being won pretty handsomely by the coalition, but those kind of soft, swinging, leaning voters, they have moved to Albanese in recent weeks, and that's probably underpinned by the leadership ratings, which have moved decisively in Anthony Albanese's favour in recent weeks. And then just to touch back on this YouGov MRP, between the first and the second wave, there were 4 major groups that they found to be moving back to Labor, and I still think this produced a distorted map, but the 4 groups were the Chinese Australians, people over 18 with a trade certificate, older voters, so over 55, and economically disadvantaged Australians. but unless I'm reading something wrong about that, that appeared to be the four major groups, and that's why seats like Chisholm didn't flip. That's why seats like Patterson didn't flip, because the trades workers, the older voters, that sort of thing. So really interesting movement there, and it does explain a lot of why their map appeared the way it did. This is my current map, and I'll include a link in the description so you can go through it in more detail yourself. The seats with full shading are those that I don't consider in play, and then elsewhere I've just sort of added margins. I'll go through some of the more specific seats later, but basically that just gives you an overview. Labor forming a minority government, and I think so I've just noticed a mistake. I initially had the Greens taking Ryan, but in fact I actually have the Coalition gaining Ryan in future slides. So just so you know, it's 2 Green and 66 to the LNP at this stage, or the Coalition. Okay, so I'll start with the two sort of wildcard seats. These are seats that they have trended towards the Coalition in recent cycles, but they're the sort of seats where incumbency and a candidate's sort of personal connections to the constituents are going to potentially have an outsized impact, as opposed to just the party brand. But having said that, they're held on very tight margins by Labor currently, and they've actually lost the incumbency advantage in Lyons by installing a new candidate, although she is known to be quite popular in the electorate. Any swing against Labor nationally definitely puts a lot of pressure on these particular seats, just owing to the fact that the trends have been very much in the Coalition's favour recently. So not only would Labor have to probably leverage the personal appeal of their candidates here, but at the same time more or less hold their own at the national level, and they've got to try and arrest these trends that have been going on since sort of 2013, 2016. But at this stage, I have both Lingiari and Lyons narrowly falling to the Coalition this time round, but that could certainly change, and I call them the wild cards because they won't necessarily move with the national environment, so definitely two to keep an eye on. In Brisbane, the Coalition have been polling strongly, as we first mentioned, and that to me tells me that the threat in Dixon, Fairfax and McPherson and what is it, Fisher, I think, there's a few sort of Tealy candidates running. I don't think that threat remains live at this point. I still have Labor as the favourites in Brisbane. We've seen a bunch of polling showing that Labor has the primary vote to take that seat, and the movement of younger men towards Labor and like the healthcare announcements, that sort of thing, I think is really going to give them the edge in a seat like that. Whereas the Greens so far, I think, have been really struggling to cut through in the campaign. And just with some of that statewide polling, I think it's too much for the Liberals not to retake Ryan. But if the Liberals were more on track for like a status quo, kind of 54-46 statewide result in Queensland, at this stage, with the way that Dutton's losing ground with women, with professionals, with younger voters, then I'd be very much looking to the Greens to retake Ryan. And that's one I'll be definitely keeping an eye on. So then 3 major Coalition held, or notwithstanding Andrew G's defection, 3 Coalition held seats that are under probably the most threat from independent candidates. And what's significant here is all of them have Climate 200 backed candidates who are running for the second or third time. So I'll start with Cowper. This one I have actually given away to Kaz Heiss, who I think is a really good fit for an electorate that's traditionally been quite conservative, but a lot of older voters and a little bit more, cosmopolitan and metropolitan than some of the other regional electorates. We've had a lot of growth in cities like Port Macquarie, and particularly in Coffs Harbour, where there's also the big bypass project going on. I personally know a few friends who've moved up there to work on that project. So there's probably been maybe perhaps a little bit more demographic change since the 2021 census than perhaps in Wannon or Calais. And I think that all works in her favour. And the other key point here is that the coalition vote is already below 40, so it's already sitting sort of close to that danger zone, and there's probably room for it to fall just a little bit more. And you know, the Nationals are only working with like a 2.5% margin at that point, so definitely the most under threat, I would argue. We go across to Calais. What I'm a little bit concerned about here is that there are 3 candidates with a genuine chance, and then you have Labor, and then you have One Nation. So like 3 candidates who could absolutely win, and then 2 more who are still going to be sort of fighting for every vote. And in those kinds of crowded fields, if there's a party or a candidate that gets well ahead on primaries, it can be really hard to chase them down. And in these big country electorates where, you know, there's a lot of polling booths, preference discipline might be a problem. Finding, you know, your preferred how to vote card could be a problem. And I just think at this point that the Nationals are going to have enough of a base vote to open up a decent lead on primaries, and then it'll be hard to chase them down. Although if Andrew G makes the final count, he probably has the best chance of knocking off the Nationals. But I still have them as favourites at this stage. And then down in Wannon, my home electorate, it's a little bit more regional than Cowper. Like, yeah, there's Warrnambool, which is a pretty large city, and a lot of younger families have moved in. But then you have these more kind of blue-collar cities like Portland, Ararat, like Dairy Country into Colac. And it's not as easy to have that sort of full penetration. It's a little bit like, say, Indi, in that respect, where there's a lot of tiny little towns and a lot of ground to cover. The thing is, I'm not so sure that Alex Dyson is the perfect fit for this kind of older, more conservative electorate. He does have this sort of slightly colourful, flamboyant, eccentric past. He has tempered all of that significantly for this campaign, but he doesn't have that sort of natural appeal that someone like a Kaz Heiss might have to this kind of demographic, which is what for me is keeping this seat as a Liberal seat. The other thing is that Dan Tehan is a fairly high profile member. He's been front bencher for a number of years now. He's not particularly disliked from what I can tell, and his primary vote was still up at like 45% in 2022 in a pretty bad cycle for the Liberals. So there's still a bit of work to do for Dyson to leech off enough of his primary vote to make the seat more competitive, and I just think it's a bit of a mountain to climb at this stage. We'll keep going. I want to keep moving. So Hunter and the Central Coast. So we did see in that YouGov survey that trade workers might be moving back to Labor, but I think in an electorate like this, it's actually energy policy that's really central, and it's probably not working in Labor's favour in seats like Hunter, and particularly in Patterson, very much sort of still reliant on the coal industry, and there's been some pushback against proposed offshore wind, and there's, you know, thoughts about the impact on tourism in the region, all very sort of important like parts of the local economy. In Hunter, though, I think the strength of the Labor incumbent is probably too much for that margin of like nearly 5% to be overturned. I think he'll be okay. But in Patterson, you know, there's much less margin to work with. The local member's not as well regarded. I think that one's still ripe to flip. But then down in Robertson, where it's probably more sort of 50-50, and they have a good incumbent member. They also have a good Liberal candidate, but I think the Liberals are going to struggle to overcome the margin there, with the national polling looking the way it is. Moving on to Metropolitan Sydney. I don't think Labor are out of the woods in the southwest, so at this stage I still have Daly maintaining a hold over Fowler. I have moved Werriwa back into the Labor column, though. I think its margin is a little bit... I think I'd be calling for a really big sort of localised swing amidst what looks to be a fairly stagnant national environment. So I think it would be a really big call to put that in the coalition's hands at this stage. But if the coalition do sort of recover nationally a little bit more, then I think we have to sort of go back and revise that. The Teals, I have them all hanging on to their seats, a little bit dicey in Mackellar, but shouldn't have too much of a problem there. Bradfield, there was this incident with the Teal candidate, got banned from a salon for saying something really dumb. And with these independent candidates, their campaigns very much depend on their personal appeal and their personal brand. And if that comes under any sort of damage or scrutiny, it can be really damaging. So for the moment, I have the Liberals just ahead there, although I have heard that there hasn't been sort of the most encouraging polling at times, and perhaps the Liberal candidate isn't really impressing the local branch that much. But at this stage, I think they're doing just enough to stay ahead. Bennelong's going to be tight, but it should. I think the Liberals will take that seat. Patterson and Reid are more or less off the table. I don't think Labor are going to have problems in Blaxland and Watson either. It seems that Trump's tariffs have kind of overtaken the Gaza issue as the main sort of foreign policy item. Elsewhere, nothing really new to report though. So we'll keep moving. Regional Victoria, a couple of seats here. So in McEwen, I just think that the deterioration of Labor's brand across the state is perhaps a little bit more concentrated in an area like McEwen. We already saw that it trended towards the Liberals in a bad cycle in 2022. I think that will continue, and there's probably not enough margin to work with here, although the local member is a fairly strong one, and there is a history of incumbent MPs hanging on in tough years. For example, Labor hanging on in 2013 and the Liberals hanging on in 2009. So it's definitely one to watch on the night. In Monash, though, again, it's a bit like Calais, where you have a few different candidates in line to make the final count against the Liberals. Probably only one of them, Russell Broadbent, would actually be in a position to take the seat from them. And I'm still not entirely convinced that he'll poll well enough to make the count. And I think, again, it's a huge electorate. Will the preference discipline be strong enough to actually overturn any Liberal lead on primary? I don't think it would, and therefore I think the Liberals will take the seat. In Greater Melbourne, so I think at this point Labor should retain all its heartland seats in the northwest, so seats like Hawke, Gorton, Corwell, Lawler, and then down into the southeast rather, you've got seats like Bruce, Holt, Dunkley, those kinds of seats. They should be buffered against any potential statewide swing at this point, even though the Allen government is continuing to poll really poorly. I think Albanese is doing enough at this stage to recover the Labor vote to the extent that, seats on sort of a 5, 6, 7, 8% margin should be safe now. The Liberals are suddenly under a bit of pressure out east though. So Aston in particular, for a long time I've thought there's no way that they won't be able to retake it, but if Chinese voters aren't sort of switching back to the Liberals really at all, then that could be a bit of an issue. Although I think the Liberals will be okay in Deakin and Menzies, particularly Menzies, where there's quite a popular local member. Chisholm, on the other hand, I think there might actually just be enough margin for Labor to hang on in this case. Even though the Liberals have a pretty good candidate, there was that problem that they had with the pre-selected candidate being dumped after the redistribution, which, that might affect the local branch's ability to campaign well. So, definitely one to watch. And at this stage, with the lack of movement back to the Liberals amongst Chinese Australians, and just in general the professional class and female voters deserting Peter Dutton, I think he's got a real problem in Chisholm now. And then in terms of the Teal seats, there's been some movement on the betting markets suggesting that the Liberals might be in with a good chance in Goldstein. We've seen some polling that suggests that as well. And then in Kooyong, a lot is being made of Monique Ryan's husband taking down that supposedly illegal sign. But at the same time, we've just had this story now with the Liberal candidate, Amelia Hamer, it's sort of coming out and saying, oh, I'm a renter and I get the struggle, but then it turns out she's a rent vestor and she's got 2 properties that she owns. So maybe that sort of cancels each other out, and Monique Ryan should be able to hang on there. And then just a quick sort of focus on the green target. So firstly, up in Richmond where I was just holidaying, it's not an easy one to sort of read in terms of its demographic profile. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of older and younger kind of hippie people, but there's a lot of travellers. So it's not especially easy to understand exactly who the voters are and what kind of change is going on there over time. There's very sort of different communities throughout the electorate too. You've got, there's actually some coalition strength, like in the cities of Ballina and up at sort of the Tweed Heads area where it's a little bit more sort of old resorty. You see those apartment balconies with like 3 or 4 stories, like very sort of Gold Coast-ish. But then is the population sort of growing much there, or is the population growing more in sort of the Byron Shire area, up into Murwillumbah, where you've got this more sort of very green left sort of politics coming through? I did notice that a lot of the kind of what you would call, I guess, awake paraphernalia, the very sort of right-wing conspiracy theory type messaging, that was a lot of, like, there were a lot of stickers and posters of that nature up sort of around the COVID time, but then a lot of that had disappeared. So I don't necessarily know what it all means, but the Greens are campaigning hard. They're always going to be a chance, but at this stage I think Labor probably doing well nationally, to the point where they can hang on there. Similar thing in Wills. I think while the Gaza issue is still going to be very important to certain voters, I'm worried that with Trump's tariffs now taking center stage in terms of foreign policy, and Labor sort of reclaiming the economic narrative and gathering up sort of more of those younger voters, that I think they should be able to hang on in Wills. And similar deal in Macnamara. I think Labor are taking the Jewish vote very seriously there. There was some suggestion that they might run an open ticket, so as not to sort of look as if they are favouring the Greens at all, which I found very interesting. As for Adelaide and Perth, not a huge amount of movement. It seems that the News Poll quarterly aggregate that put the South Australia statewide result at 50-50 has convinced markets that Sturt is going to be safe for the Liberals, and the odds there have shortened quite a lot. But there's no similar threat in Boothby, it would appear. Maybe it's got something to do with that recently announced bypass funding to get trucks going round Adelaide instead of through it. I'm not sure. And then as far as Perth goes, the Liberals only need slight bumps or slight kind of recoveries in their primary vote to retake both Curtin and also to secure more. And I think they'll do both at this stage. But, there haven't been, like, the state election was a pretty big flop, and then they haven't had the best results coming out of federal vote intention polls at the statewide level either. So that's definitely not baked in, but that's just my current contention for the moment. I think Labor will retain Tangney. A lot of Chinese voters there, a lot of professionals, the sort of people that Dutton's losing. But they also have a quite a popular incumbent there, but they don't have the same advantage in Bullwinkle, which is a seat that probably naturally is very much a coalition target. Maybe issues like the live sheep export ban are a little bit more in play in a place like Bullwinkle, a little bit more of that sort of outer suburban vote. Again, only a small recovery in the Liberal primary makes that one, or the coalition primary makes that seat very competitive. So definitely one to watch. And just having a look at like the major betting markets too. So you can see that the coalition have moved all the way out to 3.3. Labor quite short now. A lot of new money has come in the last couple of months, and that's pushed the price a lot. The other interesting thing is the majority government market, 1.5. So that hasn't really moved since when the coalition were favoured to form a minority government. And you can see that in this market too, where Labor minority is very much the favourite, but then a Labor majority is actually more likely than a coalition minority, and that would suggest that maybe Labor I guess the market is probably expecting Labor to win something like kind of 72 to 74 seats, so that it only takes a few more seats for them to form majority, whereas the coalition, the market's probably expecting the coalition to win sort of maybe like 63 to 65 seats, and it would take like more like 5 or 6, 7 seats gained from that point for them to form a minority government. So yeah, just interesting to have a look at how those betting markets are shaping up. I think I'll leave it there, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm trying to come out with some new videos on the Teals and some of the independent seats, go into a little bit more depth, and then apart from that, just trying to keep on top of all the latest developments. So thanks for watching, guys. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new and you're enjoying the content, and comment your thoughts below. See you in the next video. Goodbye.